card-carrying member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. So Vern, thank you again for being here, and I will turn the mic over to you.
Good. Well, Alex, thank you so much for the introduction. Dave, really appreciate you being on to provide the kind of real world experience. And I'm just back from Shanghai, and it's interesting. We just launched the book in Chinese Simplified. We had 400 EO members and their teams at our book launch. We then entertained for 2.5 days, a workshop for the folks that are both startups and scale-ups in China, because what they realize on the other side of the planet, we've got people from all over the world, is that, hey, this stuff really is the same across the cultures. And so glad to have such an international audience with us. I want you to know that I actually do then take some of the cash that we've got, and we invested in startups, and it's a big part of my world. So I'm a major investor in Barcelona Housing Systems. We're really trying to fix the affordable housing problem on the planet. We're partnered actually with China on that. They need 300 new cities there. Organics, Barrett was one of my early students at MIT, scaled up his first company, sold it. Now he wants to get rid of all the fertilizers on the planet. He's doing a great job. Cynthia Kay took her first company, 98 million, as a student of mine, and has launched a new one called the Live Studios. It's doing really well. Our latest valuation, I think 6.5 million on our next round. So she's starting to make progress. And then, as mentioned, I'm co-founder and chair of Geoversity. We actually have a big program going on at Harvard this weekend. And one of the people that's going to be there is a dear friend of mine, Tamsin Woolley Barker. And just to give the startup community kind of a sense of what's happening, the way that you scale really is different in the 21st century. There's a lot that's the same, but I really recommend her book, Teaming. She looked at these superorganisms that have been around much longer than we have and have scaled to much bigger heights than we generally have. And what's interesting is what she found are common among them are the things that you're going to see in most of the unicorns today. So they're cultivating collective intelligence. It's really about tapping into not only your brains, but brains beyond your organization. Nurturing what we call swarm creativity, relying on distributed leadership. Look, folks don't want to be managed in the 21st century. And it's one of the reasons why our tools have been so powerful with millennial generation. We really depend on reciprocity and sharing. And so it's the Contenio technology that Atlassian has put out there, our Confluence that I think has been so powerful for tech companies to be able to make sure everybody is connected as you begin to scale. And then what she calls compound regenerative growth. And so, but we're here talking about scaling up, and the challenge is 11,000 startups every hour, but too few scale. And that's what we really want to be supporting is what does it take? Great news is there's plenty of economy around the globe for us to scale into. 34 trillion turn of the century up to 88 trillion this year. So 2.5 times the global market for us to go after. I do want you to see, though, that the United States has continually dropped. We're less than 24% of the global economy. And so I hope a lot of you out there have ambitions to reach around the globe. Otherwise, you're leaving, if you're just US-based, 75% of the planet on the table. And I really don't think it matters what industry that you're in. We're innovating in all of them. We thought the car was going to put the horse out of business. Yet it is an absolute thriving global industry, even in China. But they had to pivot, which many of us have to as startups, in this case from transportation to a much more lucrative industry, entertainment. And it's important that along the way we kind of maintain the right mentality. And I want you to remember this, it's not so much in the startup phase, but once you do achieve success, it's easy to start playing not to lose. And I think you see it a lot with your favorite sports teams. They'll be in a lead, and all of a sudden they'll switch strategies and start playing defense. But we know that generally is a losing strategy. You have to continue to play to win. And so if you ever feel like you or your team have kind of lost that edge, you've got to go back and work on that. And ultimately, the way that you win and you win big is to be different. And we like to talk about it, but you really can't claim you're different if you price the same as everyone else in your industry. You can't really claim you're different if you hire the same people as everyone else in your industry. And you sure can't claim that you're different if you're delivering your products and services in the same way that your competition or others in the industry are delivering. So you really do have to do whatever it is you're doing different than everybody else. And it requires, as Scott at Atlassian says, and he was kind enough to endorse the back of my book, it requires both discipline and focus. Most of you know the story, if you're particularly in the tech world. They only had about 50 employees when they attended my first workshop in Sydney, Australia in 2005. They had just launched 36 months prior to that. And they did their first core values discovery exercise, the Mars mission, and many of the other things that we're going to be talking about here today. And as you watch them, they went public 4 years ago at 4.2 billion. Last I checked, they were about 30 billion in market cap since. And what's cool is both Mike and Scott still own 75% of the company. And so they were able to scale and not give it all away and become known as continually a best place to work. So in some sense, you can have it all. And they've also chosen to give some of it away. And I think one of the very important decisions they made when they were very, very small is, and maybe it seems easier back then, but think about their numbers today. They pledged 1% of their equity, product, profit, and employee time. And I think that really bodes well that the modern day company realizes they've got to equally take care of all four stakeholders: employee, the customer, the shareholder, your investors, as well as the community. And it's turned out well for everybody there at Atlassian. One of our latest unicorns, Splash Damage. Paul Lewis, our coach, was walking up to Paul Wedgwood's Ferrari, and what did he see in the back? But a copy of Scaling Up. And so, look, if nothing else, I want you to remember scaling up equals Ferrari, if nothing else. So I want to come back to this comment of Scott's, that it really requires both discipline and focus. And what I based my very original book on, Mastering Rockefeller Habits, were these three disciplines. First, is it really clear today, this week, or if you're doing 2-week sprints, what is the number one priority? Not the 5, not the 3, but the one thing that we've got to get done today, the one thing we've got to get done this week, this quarter, and this year. Now, it's best if that decision is based on real data, both quantitative data and, more importantly, qualitative data. That's part of the whole idea of the lean startup of Eric Ries, or one of my early students was Brad Feld. Brad went on to co-found Techstars and realized that you could get further faster in 3 months than 3 years if you could really engage directly and rapidly with the customer in terms of your iterations. And at the heart of all of this is this meeting rhythm. And you know from Scrum or Agile, for those of you doing programming, that this is this daily huddle. And as Cal Newport said, one of the real kind of thought leaders of this new generation, Cal said, hey, why don't you just bring the Scrum and Agile methodologies to all parts of the business, which is exactly what we did decades ago. And so if you can get in the room each day and each week and talk about the things that are really based on what we're hearing from the employees, customers, marketplace, and the data we're collecting around the KPIs around our system, then we know what we have to do next. And that's the priority data and meeting rhythm. And we really built it around kind of 4 areas, 3 based on good to great, that if you want to scale, you've got to have disciplined people engaged in disciplined thought through disciplined action. And then, of course, because growth sucks cash, we added that 4th component. And so those are the 4 decisions that the book is divided into that you've got to get right. I wish business was this neatly bucketed, but it's a way for you to begin to kind of in a more organized fashion think about the business. The whole book is even color-coded, as well as our tools to these 4 colors. And so, look, it's a 2.5-day course. Again, I just got done teaching it in Shanghai. I'll be at K1, a big private equity firm with a bunch of their portfolio firms, next week in California. We've got just a few minutes. So what I want to do is really share 4 ideas. Dave's going to weigh in on how he's applied them to his company. First, under people, what Bill Gates considered the best question he had ever been asked. Under strategy, really, what is the essence of branding, which gives you both pricing power, margin, and lowers your marketing costs. Number 3, how do you decide of the 1,000 things what you're going to work on next? How do you figure out focus? And then last, what's the universal truth around the cash component of business? So let's get started. First, if we look at the people side, Generally, I think most people work out as long as they fit your culture and they're just not a-holes. You know, the other guy that wrote a scaling up book is Stanford professor Robert Sutton. I love his no a-hole rule because, you know, there is no I in team, but they found it. It is actually hidden in the a-hole. And so those you've got to kind of sort out. Now, a lot of folks said Steve Jobs was one, but I'm going to guarantee you most of us on this webinar are not Steve Jobs. So you've got to just learn to be easy to do business with, easy to be a team member, easy to be flexible. Generally, if you can be easy in the job, that's going to help everybody else in the team. And you're under a lot of stress the way it is. Now, one of our key tools is what's called the Function Accountability Chart, or FACE. And Jim Collins said, you got to get the right butts in the right seats. We just didn't have a list. So we made one. And look, if you're a startup and it's just you, then it's your name in every one of those boxes. Me, 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 me. It's one of the reasons why Techstars, before you can even get in the program, requires you at least to have a co-founder. So with two, you can split this up, list day one. And our research at MIT, Ed Roberts, our Sloan fellow there who looked at high-tech companies coming out of that financial institution, found that two-person teams grew faster than one, three did better than two, four better than three, and five did better than four. Then we ran out of data points. And part of it is that you can divide up this list immediately. And we've given you a couple of blanks. If you're in the medical field, you might have a chief medical officer, as we do at the Riordan Clinic. If you happen to be manufacturing, which, by the way, 38% of the gazelles in China are actually in manufacturing versus IT and technology, though there are no non-tech companies. So you might have a head of quality. And so we've given you a couple of blanks that might fit your unique particular startup. And the idea, very simply, is we've got to figure out, do we have the right people doing the right things, the KPIs or OKRs, and are we doing them right? Are we getting the kind of results we're needing? And so, Dave, let me have you weigh in here. You use the FACE tool.
Yeah, so again, we kind of pulled open the book and just started going through it, and it was great because, yeah, these are all listed out just like this. We just started filling them in. And yeah, like I was most of them. So I had two other co-founders, and then we had three other people with us. And so I'm like most of them, which I think even that kind of alerted a problem that I needed to share some of the load with my two other co-founders and say, okay, like you guys are qualified people. You can take some of this off my plate here. But then I think also, you know, it helped us realize some of the gaps that we had. You know, we didn't have anybody to do treasury or controller. Like nobody was thinking about that. And so we kind of left those blank for a bit and we kind of said, okay, we need to fill these. That's kind of my job as head of company, to fill those with myself, with a contractor, with a new hire, and at least kind of keep that top of mind. And then, yeah, I think it just also gave everybody like a lot of power. It's like once they saw their name next to that area with the leading indicators and KPIs they had to hit, it empowered people. Again, they weren't just sitting around waiting for me to share what I was thinking or wondering what I was thinking. And so this was really good for me, but I think it was really good for everybody that worked with us outside of me because they actually knew what they were supposed to go do. And I've always seen a lot of like people get really empowered and they just very clearly know what to go do every day and can go do that. They work a lot better. So no, this definitely brought a lot of clarity and showed us, you know, a few holes that we had in the organization.
Good. And I like what you said. You don't have to hire somebody permanent. This can be outsourced, contracted out. We've used a PEO from the very beginning. TriNet was founded by one of my students, Martin Babinick, now one of the largest, you know, professional employee organizations. So we've really outsourced our HR to that PE firm. My IT is outsourced to a firm in Hyderabad, India. My very first really hire was a part-time bookkeeper, Claudia Smallwood, who was across the street and helped her husband build a very successful company. And so these don't have to be permanent. You can go out and reach for this contract help, but it's really helpful if you divide up the list. And by the way, I didn't realize you had two co-founders. And so kudos to you. You guys had the help that you needed. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. Like I think, for example, as a startup, like the treasury and controller, we didn't really know what that meant. There wasn't really a lot of money. There wasn't really a huge need for, you know, two different people in those roles. And we ended up, hiring a bookkeeper to do some of that and then kind of train me up on actually how to look at a P&L and understand that. So yeah, we definitely didn't have, and didn't even probably need to have those things filled early on.
Yeah. The second list, though, with people is an idea that I got from Regis McKenna. So Regis was Steve Jobs' coach in marketing. And I talk about in the book Scaling Up that marketing is really the critical function. And again, Ed Roberts' research found it at MIT that when he looked at companies that scaled further faster, one was that they had multiple founders. Number two, that there was at least one person on the team that was focused on marketing. I don't think surprisingly later that when Steve came back to Apple, the only function he really chaired was the marketing function. It was a 3-hour meeting every Wednesday afternoon. So anyway, he had a coach, Regis McKenna, and Regis was one who coached Steve and Intel and Genentech and a lot of the technology companies early on in Silicon Valley. So it's 1983, and I'm getting ready to launch the Young Entrepreneurs Organization, or put in the foundation for it. And I thought, hey, if Regis is good enough for Steve, he's good enough for me. So I cold called him. I'm a student. And I had a good elevator pitch, which you hopefully do as well as a startup. And he took me on as his only free client he says he's ever had. And he said, all right, then I'm going to teach what I taught Steve and everyone else. And he said, the first thing is you have to have a marketing meeting. And I hate to be so basic, but you've got to have a separate marketing meeting separate from sales. You've got to dedicate 1 hour a week to talking about these marketing ideas, even if it's just with yourself. And then he said, step number two, I'm going to ask you a question. And this is the question Bill Gates considered the best he'd ever been asked. Take out a piece of paper, and I want you to make a list of the top 25 influencers, brands, relationships, key people that and organizations, if we could bolt onto your idea, are going to help you scale further faster. So for instance, that executive program I launched at MIT, you only had 156 members at the time. But the fact that I got Inc. magazine and MIT to partner to put their brands on it, we called it MIT Inc. YEO. I put ours last. We had over 800 folks apply to that very first executive program that we hosted. If it had just been YEO, I would have been probably lucky to get 8. And so I made the list. Dave, I still remember it. I put, all right, President Ronald Reagan. I was going to have him get behind this organization and be the first president to talk about entrepreneurs. And I did, and actually ended up getting invited to the White House, and later on advised then President-elect George Bush and Dan Quayle in a meeting around their entrepreneurship strategy. I remember putting down, all right, I want Steve Jobs involved with this. And three years later, I hosted the big private, or his first public speech after being fired from Apple. I put down Michael Dell. I put down Inc. magazine. I got to know Bernie Goldhirsch very well, rest his soul, over the years. And Arthur Lipper's still a good friend today, who owned Venture magazine. It was crazy. We made the list and began to work through it. So, Dave, you did something similar.
Yeah, we did kind of the exact same thing, where we picked out like the biggest names in the marketing space that we knew if they used our product, then everyone else would use our product. Because our product, pops up on people's websites. It's very viral. And so if any of these people are using it, it was going to spread throughout the whole industry really quickly. And I didn't know any of them, but I knew a few people that knew all of them. And so we actually invited 2 people to be our formal advisors. And I gave them like a little bit of equity, less than 0.5%. And kind of the call was, hey, if you are our advisor, I need you to connect me to these 50 people here. Like, do you know them? Which ones do you know? How can you introduce me and all that? And they kind of got to work, and they basically turned into all 50 relationships, where I think after like 3 or 4 months, we probably had 45 of the 50 using Proof. And it was just awesome. And I think that led to like a huge amount of success. And it's like we gave up, less than 1% of equity, and the company probably became 10 times bigger than it would have in that short amount of time. So kind of a no-brainer. But I think it's just the exercise of like listing those things out, realizing we didn't know any of them, figured out, okay, let's find people that do, and working backwards from there was one of probably like the 2 or 3 best things we did, I think.
Yeah. And so I love to use the story about Tony. It's like yours, Dave. But he's doing sun tanning salons, but he in Dallas said, hey, if I could be the official sun tanning salon of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, which he did, And then he got Mark Cuban, the billionaire sports owner, to be his spokesperson on his radio ads. And you bolt those two brands and get those two influencing organizations and people involved in the organization, it's over. Now, he was a great operator, practiced the Rockefeller habits and scaling up, but he became the largest regional player in his space in a very short period of time. He then sold to the largest player, made wine for 10 years, wrote a book about how he scaled up this business. And then, you can't keep a good entrepreneur down. You've been a serial entrepreneur yourself. And so he just called me about 9 months ago. He said, hey, I've got a new BHAG, and he's launched a whole chain of Crunch Fitness centers. He's back doing it again. And so here's the book that I recommend. At least, if you don't read it, set it on your desk and stare at it the rest of your life. And that is Keith Ferrazzi's Never Eat Alone. By the way, Keith was at Regis McKenna's firm. That's where he kind of first learned the things that he's gone on to teach and write about in his various books. And I really think it's the single most important KPI, and that is how many coffees, first lunch, second lunch, third lunch, afternoon coffee do you have with that list of influencers. And look, I think if you've got to get on an airplane and fly halfway across the country, your country, or the planet to have the right strategic meeting, that's worth more than the other 100 things that you have on your to-do plate. Dave, I imagine you spent then a lot of time finding ways to network to that group of 50.
Yeah, totally. And I think what I found is that there's a lot of people that are really influential and can be powerful for us that aren't necessarily famous. And so it's not like they get a ton of these emails or a ton of these requests. I mean, they're reasonably accessible, and I think it's like one of the most underutilized, underleveraged channels, where if you get, a few of them, to say yes, it opens up more than, $100,000 of Facebook ad spend or whatever. And they maybe get a couple of these requests a month. And so they don't have to be these famous, super in demand people to open up massive doors.
Yeah. And a couple of key hints there. It really, if you do get to some of these folks, they get asked a lot. And even before you ask for a favor, it's so important that you give first. And if nothing else, I give attention. So I want to be really, practical here. What I do is when you make the list, that I really wanted to get to a guy named Greg Brenneman, who's one of the top turnaround guys out of Houston. And so what you do is you start by getting to know their assistant's name, and his assistant's name is Carolyn. And you then, because you normally get her or his email address. And then what you want to do is you want to put the person's name and their company name in Google Alerts. And by the way, even now that they're on the list, you're 50, you want to put those people's names and the company names in Google Alerts so that as things happen in their world, you're alerted. And so August 15th, now that I'm, good friends with Greg, I was alerted that he was mentioned in an article by one of his mentees. And I think I saw it probably before he did. And so it gave me a reason to reach out to him, to recognize him, to honor him, to give him a gift, if you would, if nothing else, my attention. And I said, hey, I don't know if Greg, you noticed, but one of your mentees just was featured in a major story. She happened to mention you as her mentor, and what a great experience it was. And he was so appreciative that I had paid attention to him and forwarded that to him. And it just continued to deepen our relationship to where he said, hey, I've just asked Caroline, the next time I'm in Endeavor, let's make sure that we have dinner. And that's the kind of way you do it. So utilize these search engine alert capabilities so that you can stay in touch with the most important influencers, customers, media personalities, and others in your world. And so I want to finish with an example. Sam Goodner down in Austin. You may have known Sam or know Sam, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know of him, but I've heard of this company here.
Yeah, so he was an early Microsoft solution provider, one at 15,000, and ended up scaling it. I'll give you the results in a second. But one of the key things he did is Microsoft has a big show every July. I've keynoted it many times. And Sam would consciously sit down. And of the 60,000 people that are going to be there, he'd make a list of the 100 that he most wanted to spend time with there. A lot of them were key people inside Microsoft, as well as inside the industry, as well as media. And then he did two things. He would arrange for the private airport transfer of those people to their hotel. And then he would throw an event where he would invite these 100 people. And it became, at some point, the place to be and be seen. But he did this at the very beginning when he first got started. And this thing built up over time. And look, you would think Microsoft would be logical in its distribution of leads and its selection of, best partners. Hey, they're people. And when you nurture these kind of relationships, it wasn't surprising. Catapult first won every award Microsoft could give, got more attention than almost any Microsoft solution provider that they would host, and ultimately networked his way to Chinasoft, which is whom he sold to a couple of years ago, and is now the world's largest Microsoft solution provider. But Sam will tell you it was the single most important thing he did every year in order to scale the organization. And then look, I don't want you to forget folks inside. I know a lot of you are just kind of starting up, but I learned it from Gary Hirschberg. Gary would take, when he started up Stonyfield Yogurt, and he just had a handful of employees, he would take one employee to lunch every week, because you think they're going to talk to you and share stuff, but everybody's running around and you're crazy busy. And by having that 45-minute lunch, it allowed him every week to connect with one person in the company and go a little deeper in both the relationship as well as finding out what's going on. Because a lot of folks, again, assume as the founder that you're just too busy to hear some things. And one of my favorite stories is like, I'm out with one of my early employees and say, how's it going? He goes, everything's fine. And they're chit-chatting. And at the end of lunch, he goes, is everything okay? And he goes, yeah. Are you sure we may not have this lunch again soon? He goes, well, Gary, there is this one thing. And it was always that was the case. You as the founder, CEO, will always be the last to know. And so one of the things Kerry Smith did, one of my heroes who scaled out Big Ass Fans, is he did the same thing. He would take a couple employees to dinner every week. And that was how he built. And I got to tell you, in my coaching organization, there are 5 coaches that if I've got them on my side, all the rest fall in line. So don't forget to be nurturing relations inside as well as outside from the very beginning. And by the way, if you're going to go from good to great on the people side, that's why we think coaching's so critical. As we know, no one's ever achieved peak performance without a coach. Bill Campbell, the subject of the $1 Trillion Coach Book, which has been so popular here in 2019, he coached Bill Campbell and Steve Jobs. And so I love this little video clip that we put together.
Everyone needs a coach. It doesn't matter whether you're a basketball player, a tennis player, a gymnast, or a bridge player. My bridge coach, Sharon Osberg, says there are more pictures at the back of her head than anyone else's in the world. Sorry, Sharon. There you go. We all need people who will give us feedback. That's how we improve. For years, I've received so many different kinds of advice. I don't know where to start. One that comes to mind is to have a coach. Our board member in 2002, John Doerr, said, you need a coach. And I said, well, I don't need a coach. I'm a CEO. Why would I need a coach? Is something wrong? No, you need a coach. Everybody needs a coach. So Bill Campbell became my coach and has served Google very well. Every famous athlete, every famous performer has somebody who's a coach. Somebody who can watch what they're doing and say, is that what you really meant? Did you really do that? They can give them perspective. But one thing people are never good at is seeing themselves as others see them. A coach really, really helps.
So we think it's critical for you to have that, and that's why we've got him there to support you. Dave, let's now switch gears to strategy. And here our line is, if you can't state it simply, and I've asked this question all over the planet, including China last week. And when I say these 2 words, what company comes to mind? Deliver pizza. And everywhere in the world, that's Domino's, except for Southeast Asia, where Pizza Hut got there first. And then if you add a promise in 30 minutes or less, or a promise guarantee, it's free, Deliver pizza 30 minutes less or free is the strategy that Tom Monahan used to scale up Domino's and put $4 billion in his pocket. Not that that matters. And if you think you're doing something slightly more complex than feeding college kids faces fast, that was no different than Larry Ellis from the very beginning. And really roughly the same kind of message. What is the word or I want you to remember? I want you to remember the name of our database. Let's make a promise. In this case, very precise. It's 5 times, not 4 or 6. Or you're going to win $10 million. So why does this work? Because it does. Word or two you own, promise, and then what are you going to do to back it up? The other thing we've learned about scaling is that even when they hit their highest market cap 2 months prior to Steve Jobs' untimely death, they only had 7% global market share. Yet that represented 50% of the profitability of the entire industry. As a result, we don't really think you want to go after market share. You want to go after profit share. So we form what we call the 770 rule. You want to pick a niche within a broader industry, and that's what you want to own. So you don't want to go after more than what I'm going to consider the most profitable 10% of a broad market, but you want to own that segment. IKEA has done that in furniture retail. They only 6.9% global market share in furniture retailing, yet they own 72% of this segment called flat pack. So to do that, I want to start with what I consider the most important strategy questions ever been asked. It was popularized by Clayton Christensen, and that is, are you clear? What is the job that your product or service is doing for the customer or your customer's customer? When my son was first born, I wanted the safest automobile. The job I needed was not to get from point A to point B. Any car can do that. But I needed it to keep us the safest. And they owned, in my mind, safe automobile. And so I want to suggest more generically that we're all in the same business. And the hint comes from our work at Geoversity, and that is the path of rivers of nature. As it's going from ever to the ocean, the rule it's using is path of least resistance. Said another way, to me, the job of all of our products and services at the end of the day is to make someone else's job or life easy. Look, you can have a killer app that has all these benefits and features, but if it's not dirt simple, easy to use, it's dead on arrival. You know, who's one of the wealthiest guys on the planet? Bill Gates looks like he maybe just passed him this week, but that's Jeff Bezos. And they perfected from day one, even trademarked and patented their one-click easy approach. And that's what they obsess on every single week. What do we have to do to make it even easier? So the thing that I'd like you as a startup to do is every week when you get in that weekly meeting, I want you to say, all right, what do we have to do this week to make it even easier for people to find us, to believe us, to use our website, to order from us, to ultimately use our product or service? And if what you're doing isn't easy, that's going to be a huge constraint to scaling up. He just retired a couple of weeks ago from Alibaba in China, and I think it was simple. They had this very simple statement just to make it easy to do business anywhere. And so here's a buddy of mine with 7 employees and a dog. He owns this market. There's his dog. He owns this market of helping Americans that want to drive their car south get Mexican auto insurance. And notice it's like Amazon, one click, easy to get done. So Dave, is it anything you guys are focusing on? Where does easy play in to your product or service?
Yeah, so we, kind of laid out initially, like, what was that brand promise for us? And we came up with better conversions in 14 days guaranteed. And if our product didn't increase your conversions, basically we created a 14-day free trial, then you wouldn't convert, you wouldn't pay. And that we had that amount of window to do that. So I think that really focused us on the right customers, but then also it also focused us on making it really easy to get set up, because if, it took them 11 days of the 14 days to get set up, they wouldn't be able to run the trial, they'd cancel, they'd be frustrated, they want an extension of the trial, et cetera. And so we kind of came up with KPIs, one around, average increase in customer conversion rate, but then secondly, time to self-install. We wanted to make it as simple and easy as possible to self-install. And kind of some of the brand promises that came out of that, again, were highest converting and easiest to implement. And so easy was like right there at the beginning, that we thought if we could be easier than all of our competitors and easier than other tools people could use to increase conversions, we would win every time. And so definitely ease of use was a huge part of the strategy early on.
And I love that you mentioned self-serve. It's interesting. The research is clear. When customers self-serve, their satisfaction goes up. And it might seem, not logical, but if you think about it, would you rather go to an ATM to get cash or stand in line during banking hours in order to, this idea of self-serving and making it easy for people to self-serve, I think is critical. It's one of the things I think that you can do that really differentiates you in the marketplace. So it leads to our 7 strat. And Dave, I know it's a tool that you use. We wanted to pull from Clayton Christensen and Michael Porter and Francis Fry and kind of some of the smartest strategy thinkers in the world, and see if we could put together kind of a unified theory on one page, the 7 key decisions that you need to make in order to really nail this. Now, we're not going to have time to go through all of those, but you mentioned one right away, which is, let's start by getting clear. What's the word or 2 you want to own in the market? So Dave, was yours better conversion? Was that what you guys settled on? And how did you use this tool, the 7 strat?
Yeah, so I would say if there's any tool you use and take away, sit down and go through this, because ask really hard questions. Ask questions that are kind of uncomfortable. How are we actually even different? Like, how does this become, 10x and have like a 10x differentiator? And some of those like weren't easy for us to answer at the beginning. But it's going to force us to sit down, like wrestle through really tough questions that you have to answer to become a big company. So I love this tool, and I'm actually looking at the one that we even created back then. The word that we wanted to own was social proof, actually, and maybe even bigger than that was social proof marketing. Was kind of this category that didn't really exist. There wasn't really anybody kind of doing this with like social proof notifications on the side, except for one other company. But we said, let's go own that. And fast forward about 2 years, and I was talking to a prospect, and we were just talking about them signing up, and they said, yeah, well, I was looking for, social proof marketing tools, and we were trying to, improve our social proof marketing. And I just laughed. I was like, that wasn't even a thing 2 years ago. Nobody talked like that. Nobody, knew that. And out of that, I think we were able to go kind of dominate social proof marketing and social proof as the word. And I think when people think about, us, they think social proof now.
Well, and that's what I love. I'll skip the one. It's what I love about entrepreneurs. We often get to create whole new categories. So Darius Bikoff knew he couldn't own water. You can't own marketing. But he said, I'm going to take water and add vitamins and minerals to it. And he created the first new beverage category in 25 years that he called enhanced waters. And then the key is get the media to third party endorse you. So I don't know. Dave, you and I didn't talk about it, but I don't know if others have independently said you guys are the kings of or queens of or godfathers of social proof marketing. But, we labeled him at Fortune the godfather of enhanced waters. And he then got Coke and Pepsi to bid against each other. And when the dust settled, he sold this thing to Coke for $4.1 billion. And don't you wish sometimes, I do, I wish I'd just taken water and added vitamins to it. And sometimes the crazy stuff that I'm doing out there in the marketplace. But I love that you created a new category, Dave. And now when you create it and you popularize it, you are the natural owner. And that is powerful marketing.
And it was small enough. It was small enough that nobody even cared or noticed. Again, it was just this like little kind of inconsequential sliver of the market. And so we kind of quickly like dominated it and became it, and then kind of grew the market, and all of a sudden 50 or 70 competitors came in after us and kind of like grew the market. So we're like, now it's at least a thing. It's still small, but it's a thing. And we're kind of the Google of this really small market. But that allows us then to go launch into the next market, which we're moving into more personalization tools. Allows us to like move into that with strength, as opposed to just kind of being like one of a lot of other competitors inside of a pool.
Yeah, cool. Then I want to drill real specific for a moment, and that is just down to the company name and a second idea here in a moment. So, a buddy of mine launched a SEM firm, and as you know, Dave, there's a gazillion of those as well. And they were in their 20s. They called it this kind of techie thing, Claction. But then they said, we really want to do SEM different. And they began to hire PhDs in physics and mathematics. And they wanted to optimize like 1 million keywords instead of 15,000, and they landed Iberia, the airline. And with their work, they managed to double Iberia's revenue, but revenue. But they knew they couldn't go out to the broad market with this kind of cheesy looking website and all that. So they made really two important decisions. First was they wanted to see themselves as the luxury brand. And they said, all right, what do all luxury brands have in common? It's like two proper names, like Dolce and Gabbana and Moet Hennessy, and even Häagen-Dazs were two made up names, but they pieced them together because it sounded exotic and luxurious. And so they renamed the company Gauss and Neumann. They picked a really top mathematician and physicist, which really emphasized the foundation of how they did it different. They went all black and white to give it a really luxurious. Remember, they only got a handful of employees. And then, more importantly, and this is a message we have to a lot of startups, and that is the importance of sub-branding your unique approach to how you do things. Name it. If all product companies name everything, 55,000 products 3M has, each has a distinct name, so the market can point to it. So here's what they did. They coined a term with our help called mass marketing. They said, that's what we're doing. We're doing mass marketing instead of mass marketing, which stood for massive array of structured keywords. And I'd really encourage people to go to their site and really look at the depth here. We then labeled them the Mass Marketing Company and Fortune, and they end up landing one of the largest utility companies in the United States, and they're based in Barcelona. Now they're off to the races. The early guys who scaled up Rackspace there in your area, Dave, Graham Weston and Lanham Napier. Lanham just wrote a book this year about them scaling and selling this for $7 billion. And they said one of the single most important decisions they made is they knew their brand promise, but then they branded it Fanatical Support. And they became as much or more known for their fanatical support as they did the company name. I'm more known for Rockefeller Habits than I am for my name, or even what was our original name of our company, Gazelles. Even this PE firm that we do a lot of business with, Riverside, they said what makes us different as a PE firm, and there's thousands of them out there, is that we add Sparkle. And they actually have this acronym called Sparkle with an exclamation point that describes their unique approach to turning your financial valuation into a strategic valuation. So I encourage companies to not only have the right company name, but sub-brand their unique approach, if you would, to social proof marketing. Do you guys have a sub-brand like that, Dave?
Yeah, we don't have anything that's, real, niched in and kind of carved out like that. Yeah, probably the biggest thing would be, we just started talking about social proof marketing like it was already a thing. And we just said, here's how to get your social proof marketing strategy ready for, 2018. And here's how to add social proof marketing to everything. And we just kind of acted like it was already real. Yeah. And people started using the term back to us.
Yeah. I remember Sapient, when they scaled, they branded their unique approach to creating custom software. They called it Quad, QUAD. It's like quality, user assured delivery or something. But they became as well known for the Quad brand as they did their company name, Sapient. And so that's why we think it's critical to create these sub-brands. And then we know that if you want to convince somebody to buy your product or service, you want to give them 3 reasons. 3 beats 2 or 4 or a list of 10. And that's strata number 2. And so one of the startups we were involved with early on, this shipping family, really was concerned about the bad image that ferries had in the Philippines. Literally, they've killed more people in the Philippines through ferries than almost everyone else combined. And they've got 7,000 islands that they need to link. So they launched this service called FastCat, and their BHAGs have 23 of these. 30 of them. I think they're up to like 23. And notice, first of all, their tagline: it's never been this easy to travel around the Philippines. And they said, look, Vern, you're going to love it. We got really clear what are the 3 reasons people ought to use our ferry than anyone else. They even painted it on the side of the ferry. We're ferry safe, ferry fast, and ferry convenient. And so we think that's number 2 decision. And I think you shared some of that. David, you boiled it down to kind of the 3?
Yeah, we've got 3 here that are highest converting. We feel like that's a step above the other ones. highest converting, easiest to implement, and then with flexible integrations. And
Yeah,
so
you got it.
it has to play nicely with everyone else's tools.
Perfect. And you're exactly right. There's always one that you lead with. And so Southwest Airlines, low fare, they lead with lots of fun, lots of flights. And so the 3 really does work. And notice it's even then the second banner on their website. So first banner, their ease. Second banner, their 3 promises. And by the way, if you want to go from good to great, when it comes to strategy, you really got to have learning. And so we've known that if you want to 10x the company, you've got to 10x the thinking within the organization. And that's why we launched this Growth Institute and this online Master of Business Dynamics that, by the way, we just did a webinar for Draper Ventures, and they're presented us to all 800 of their portfolio firms because they know that this out-learning the competition is one of the critical competitive advantages in the marketplace. And this course itself is all online and mobile ready. Let's now switch to execution. And here we're well known for this Rockefeller Habits checklist. It's 10 habits. And the way I like to think about it is you're piloting your organization, and there isn't a pilot that wouldn't think to take off. I got all the way through solo and slow flight and getting my license. And you wouldn't think to take off without going through a checklist. That's why it's one of the safest things that you can do today is be on a commercial airliner in the United States, safer than walking across the street. And what it really does is provide focus and discipline. So talk a little bit about how the checklist has helped you, Dave.
Yeah, so this is one of the tools that I didn't really know if we needed that much at first until I kind of printed off and showed the team. And they were like, yes, we want this, so they really were like, I know you don't think that, but we really need this. And so we would just look through it and just kind of pick one every quarter. And then we'd print off a poster, we'd put it up on the wall, we'd say, this is our, core focus. And so it can be a little intimidating, I think, to look at all 10 and think, I think the first time we went through it, we had barely even one. But we just kind of kept sawing wood and kept knocking them off one by one. And each quarter we'd really nail it and then move on to the next one. And it just brought so much alignment, to the company, and everybody got really, really excited and felt like they could just operate a lot more effectively. And so that's how we did it, at least by just doing one a quarter.
Yeah, cool. And, one of my favorite quotes is this one by the late Stephen Covey. The challenge is, how do you figure out the main thing? And so I remember when Mark was getting ready to go public, and we'd sent a couple of our reporters out, because one of the things he's always been disciplined around from the beginning is to have this kind of quarterly meeting where it's all hands on, and they're deciding not the 5, not the 3, but what's the one thing we're going to work on next? And we thought it was going public. That was big enough. But Mark really surprised us at the quarterly meeting. He said to his employees, look, I got the IPO. What I need you to do is put your heads down, stay focused, and get us mobile. I mean, overnight, people quit using PCs and were using mobile devices. In the meantime, they go public, the stock collapses, he's getting beat up in the media, but he didn't care because what they were focused on over the next 90 days was to get mobile. And what's amazing is they did. And 98% of the revenue group came from a channel that didn't exist the 10 years before. And if they had done 900 other things, but this, they would have been that light blue line over the next 18 months is what we call Yahoo. Yahoo never got mobile soon enough. And by the way, the stock responded, he's had some rough, year, but it's still over $500 billion. And so we think the key book to read in this area, and I think it's a must read for all business leaders. And that's the late Israeli book, Eli Goldratt, The Goal. And what he did is he taught us that if you've got limited time, limited budget, limited effort, we all do, that you've got to go to where the constraint is. It doesn't mean weakness or strength, but it's the constraint. And so in my second book, I talked about Robert Taylor when he started up Soft Soap. And as he went from 0 to 39 million, he's going into year 2. And obviously he got a lot of constraints, cash and distribution and just office space and all the things that come with growth. But he knew that if he didn't get focused on the real constraint, he was going to lose the company. And that was, he'd gotten word that Colgate-Palmolive was going to steal his idea. So he looked, stepped back, and he said, there's the constraint, the spring pump. There happened to be only one company in the world that made them at the time. It was in California. So he visited him. And he goes, all right, what was your biggest order last year? And it was his, 5 million units. He said, how many are you going to make this year? And they go, well, we're going to make about 100 million spring pumps. And he goes, sold. And he negotiated 12-cent price, but he locked up all the spring pumps. And so when Colgate-Palmolive was going to jump into the market, boom, no spring pumps. And that allowed him to scale to the point where Colgate had to buy him for $1 gazillion just to get the spring pumps. What do we call the strategy? Blackmail. But the key is, and it's what Steve, when he locked up the worldwide rights to this proprietary Toshiba flash drive that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket, that was the job that the iPod was going to do for you. It really allowed him to control his destiny. Elon Musk is having a hard time, both in solar. His solar panels just caught a couple of Walmarts on fire. China's on fire with solar. I don't know how he's going to do it on an electric car, though this announcement of the new SUV is pretty cool. But the one thing he knows is the real constraint in both, solar energy and electric cars is the battery. And that company of his, they don't talk much about, but it is his best performing, fastest growing. They just saved Australia $40 million putting in an array of his batteries to handle demand offloading demand onto his batteries. And so he's on fire. If he can become the Intel inside every car and every home and every company, then he'll be the Intel of his industry. And so the key is here to line up what are all of the challenges that your company's facing and try to find that front domino to be clear what is the number one thing you've got to do every few months. So Dave, where are you guys in stepping back and focused around these priorities?
Yeah, so we're launching this new product right now called Smart Journeys, which basically personalizes your site based on who is on the site at the time. And it's a new idea, innovative, and frankly, we just don't know if it works. We don't know if it actually increases conversion or what configurations or what customers or whatever. So there's a lot of questions around that. And that hurts a lot of things. It's a cloud around which direction we take the product. Account management doesn't quite know, how to set it up. Sales, that's not a super strong pitch. And so what we kind of said was the number one domino we need right now in the whole company is winning experiments. They could be winners or losers, but we need experiments. We need to be launching experiments, taking them, to significance and having real case studies come out of this. Even if it's bad, that's still a learning. And so we kind of aligned the company and we said, okay, everyone, like the whole company goal is we're trying to get 10 winning experiments here, because if we have that, sales is so much easier because I just say, hey, here's 10 companies like you that, this has worked for. Account management is so much easier because somebody comes in, they just look at the 10 and say, okay, which one of these do we want to launch? Product, direction is kind of, does itself because you just say, okay, well, how do we do these things easier or faster? And so that's kind of been the big thing that the whole company has rallied around is just like getting winning experiments here. And we truly feel like that's the thing that that makes everything else easier. And so like what we do is we're celebrating that. So we're throwing a little party every time we do that. We had like big balloons in of like one of our last case studies had an 11% lift. And so we had like 2 huge 11, balloons. And we just ordered Franklin's Barbecue here in town, which is like the best barbecue in the world. Everyone's eating it right now just to celebrate that winning experiment. So we're trying to like put celebrations and alignment and incentives around the few things that matter. So everybody kind of knows, because I think for me, it's easy. I say a ton of stuff matters. You catch me any different day of the week, I'm going to say this other thing matters. Marketing matters, sales matters, success matters. But like when we incentivize something with money, it becomes really clear, okay, Dave really cares about this one thing right here. Let's all go towards that.
Dave, I love it. And it doesn't mean people aren't doing their day jobs, but it gives you kind of a rallying cry. It gives you a focus that allows the organization to move forward on a very important initiative. And if you can kind of knock one off every few months, compound interest is your friend moving forward. The other thing that's at the heart of our work is this meeting rhythm, this day, week, month, quarter, year. That really is the heartbeat of the communication of the organization. And I got to tell you, the minute you get a second person in anything, a venture or a relationship, the number one issue is communication. And so it's one of the things that we've become well known for, this daily where you're really clearing out issues so the weekly can be focused more on priorities and really give you a chance to kind of debate and dig into a few things more deeply. Monthly, then when you can handle some of the bigger issues, and then quarterly, you're back in a room and say, all right, hey, we did that. What are we going to do next? and particularly the daily agenda. So John, my partner, sold his company successfully, and he decided he wanted to give back to his community of Westchester, Pennsylvania, and he wanted to create kind of a WeWork space, but for business owners. He didn't want to be WeWork space, but he called it a Line.Space. And so he finds this bank. It's got this beautiful vault, and there's his team on the right, and the design and architectural and construction team on the left. And notice all the really happy faces until the project started. And like almost overnight, he becomes over budget, running 5 months late. And he's on one of our council calls, and it dawned on him, he wouldn't have thought to run his company without a daily huddle. And so he initiated a 7:58 a.m. call with the 8 of them, just for 5 minutes, to check in with our 3 agenda items, kind of what's up today and where are we, what's the progress measurably, and any money we're going to be spending. And more importantly, are you stuck? Is there something you're waiting for that's getting in the way of you being productive? And a project that was running 5 months late got delivered in the next 5 weeks. And it's a beautiful space for entrepreneurs to hang out in the Westchester, PA area. So where did the meeting rhythm come in for you, Dave?
Yeah, we started doing the huddles right away. That was one of the first things we did. And honestly, again, I'd say with the 7 strata and this, like, do this if you do anything else. And it was really simple. And we actually set a goal that it had to be under 10 minutes. Like, we got penalized if it was over because we wanted to keep it really short and just fly through it. But honestly, it's like, we've probably missed a daily huddle 5 times in the last 3 years since we started doing it. Cause it's just that good. It's that easy. It takes almost no work, and there's so much benefit from it. And, not every day is there huge benefit. Sometimes it's just a quick check-in. Nobody has any thoughts. Let's get out of here and get to work. But it at least provides like a daily forum that, like, at least you have to wait at max, 24 hours before you can talk to the team about something on your mind. So just like a nice, like, scaffolding that we can hang a bunch of company decisions on.
Yeah, perfect. And so again, if you want to go from good to great, what's helpful there in the execution is technology, and we've got a scoreboarding system that kind of allows you to keep track of all of this. Last, if we look at cash, it's king. The key is to have access to a lot of it. John did when he scaled up, and a good friend of mine, John Mullins, wrote a book called The Customer Funded Business. And that, if I come back to Sam, that's what he did. He was, a simple thing. He was paying his people twice a month, but only collecting from customers once a month. So he just started collecting from customers twice a month. And all of a sudden his cash flow issues got taken care of. Dwight made sure that his money was being held hostage by big companies' payable clerks. So he made a list of the top payables clerks, just like you would the list of influencers. And he had build relationships and made it easier for their invoice to be paid. And sure enough, they got paid much quicker. And then obviously, if you increase profit, you increase cash. So I want to finish up here because we're running a little over time here. We want to leave some time here for Q&A. I want to kind of wrap up with a final story. So these father-son team recognized an important trend. People want to eat local, particularly critical with honey, but it's not easy to get your own honey. So they invented a device called the Flow. They 3D printed, so there are like no non-tech companies today. And they needed to raise $70,000. So they went out, could have gone to friends, families, and fools, but instead they went out to these new crowdfunding sites. They're really pre-sales sites where you're getting the cash from customers, John Mullins said. And they set a record. The first 15 minutes, they pre-sold $250,000 of this device. They then went to hit their first $1 million in 3 hours, doubled in the next 11 hours. And when the dust settled in 30 days, they had generated over $12 million in revenue and across 36,000 customers. And notice their sales pitch. Harvesting honey is easier on the beekeeper. It's so much easier on the bees. Now, how'd they do this? The Sun made the list of 25. The influencers, they thought, could reach about 3 million people interested in, rabid, if you would, about eating local. And he just nurtured that list. Here, we're going to launch next month, next week, next hour. And that free marketing, just working that list, is what drove them to set every record you imagine. They now have the Flow 2 out, and where Elon Musk for the Tesla won the Innovation Award for the World in 2015, this father-son startup won it in 2016. And so I think it pulled full circle. It's about easy. It's about owning a word or two. It's about getting customer funded, making the list and working that list. And so we think if you can pull an A team together around a very clear one-page vision and then get some of these routines in place, you then can begin to scale. And so hopefully there were 4 practical ideas. First, around people, make that list. Number 2, around branding, it's a word or two you want to own, and then the 3 promises that you can make. Focus is then around the constraint and the universal truth about funding. It's best if it comes from the customer. So that's it. Dave, thank you for being on. Alex, we'll turn it back over to you, and then let's open it up for Q&A.
All right, awesome. Well, Vern, as always, thank you so much. It's always fantastic hearing from you and learning from you. Every session, always a new piece of information that we glean from.